Hey, welcome. Today, we're jumping into a topic that, let's be honest, can get a little complicated: giving in the Bible. We're going to try to untangle two big ideas that often get mixed up: the New Testament collection and the Old Testament tithe, and see what they really tell us about generosity. And really, it all comes down to this one question, doesn't it? It's a question I'm sure most of us have asked at some point. Is giving a flat 10% a hard and fast rule for Christians? Well, as you might guess, the answer isn't a simple yes or no. It's actually a lot more interesting than that. So, to really get a handle on this modern question, we've got to go back to the source. The Bible actually gives us two pretty distinct models for giving. And if we can understand each one on its own terms, I think we can get a much clearer picture of the whole thing. Okay, let's dive in with the first model, the one we see in the New Testament. We're looking at the Apostle Paul, who's raising money for the church in Jerusalem. They were really struggling, but what's so fascinating is how he talks about it. He doesn't frame it as a duty or a rule, he frames it as an expression of something else entirely. And the key is this one Greek word, charis. Paul uses it over and over again for this collection. It's the exact same word he uses for grace. And that is so intentional. He's basically saying, hey, this act of giving isn't some obligation you owe. It's a joyful response to the grace you've already been given by God. It's like this gift that flows from God, moves through us, helps those in need, and then circles right back to God as thanksgiving. What's really cool here is that Paul sees this giving as this multifaceted thing. He breaks it down into 5 really powerful ideas. It's an act of grace, an expression of abundance, a proof of love, a tool for equality, and a reason for thanksgiving. Let's just quickly hit on a few of the big ones. First off, it was completely voluntary. Paul actually points to the Macedonian churches. He says, look at them. Even though they were poor themselves, they gave like crazy, willingly and joyfully. He explicitly says, this is not a command. The engine here isn't somebody telling you what to do. It's a generous heart that wants to give. Second, this was about way more than just money. For Paul, the collection was actual, tangible proof of faith. It was a way for the Corinthian church to show that their belief was the real deal, that their love was genuine, that they were actually living the gospel they talked about. Actions speak louder than words, right? And this brings us to a super important point. The goal was equality. Now, this wasn't some plan to make everyone have the exact same bank account or to make the givers poor. It was much more about community care. It was about using the abundance one group had to meet the real, genuine needs of another part of the family, just to make sure everyone had enough. Okay, let's switch gears and look at the other, more famous model, the tithe. Now, to really get this, we can't just think of it as a flat 10% you drop in a plate. We have to go back to its origins in the Old Testament and see what it was actually designed to do for the entire nation of Israel. What you see right away from this timeline is that the tithe wasn't just this one static rule. It evolved over hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, it starts with Abraham as this spontaneous, one-off act of worship. Then, way later, under the law of Moses, it gets formalized into this huge system that's part of Israel's social and religious DNA. By the time of the prophets, it was almost like a barometer for the nation's faithfulness to God. So the tithe basically worked in 2 directions at once. You've got the vertical direction towards God. It was an act of worship, a way of saying, hey, you are the one who provides everything, and we remember that. But then there was a horizontal direction, towards people. And this was just a brilliant social system. It supported the Levites, the priests who didn't own land, and it also acted as a welfare system to make sure the most vulnerable people, orphans, widows, immigrants, were taken care of. And get this is a fact that I think blows a lot of people's minds. It wasn't just one single 10% payment. The system was way more complex. The source material shows there were probably multiple tithes. One for the priests, another one that you'd use for these big community feasts at religious festivals, and a third tithe that was collected every 3 years specifically for the poor. Okay, so we've looked at the New Testament collection, which is all about grace, and the Old Testament tithe, this big system of worship and community care. So how do they actually stack up against each other? This is where the answer to our original question really starts coming into focus. So this table kind of lays out the nuts and bolts, right? The differences on the surface are pretty clear. The collection was motivated by cheerful, voluntary hearts. The tithe was motivated by obedience to the law. The collection amount was proportional. You gave based on what you had. The tithe was a fixed percentage of your crops or animals. One was unstructured, the other was super systematic. But that is not the whole story. And here it is. This is where it all clicks. Because even with all those differences in the how and the how much, the why is almost identical. When you look at the principles underneath, they start to overlap in this beautiful way. Both are acts of a saved community. Both are ways of saying God is the source of everything. Both are proof of a life lived in faith. They both build up the community. And at the end of the day, both are an expression of loving God and loving your neighbor. So, what's the big takeaway here? Where does all of this leave us? Well, the source material kind of pushes us away from a simple rules-based answer and towards something that gets to the real heart of what giving is all about. On the one hand, you have this idea that love without any kind of form or structure can be, well, a little unreliable. A feeling of generosity is great, but without a plan, it can be inconsistent. It's why Paul, even while talking about voluntary giving, told the Corinthians, hey, set aside money each week. Having a structure gives our love a tangible, consistent way to show up. But on the other side of that coin, form without love is just empty rule following. It's just compulsion. And this was Jesus's exact beef with the Pharisees, right? They were so careful about tithing 10% of their tiny little garden herbs, but they completely missed the whole point of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And this quote from Jesus just nails the conclusion perfectly. He's saying it's not an either-or. The goal isn't just to check a box and follow a rule, and it's not just to feel generous. It's about bringing the two together, a heart of love and mercy that expresses itself through consistent, faithful action. So in the end, maybe do I have to give 10% isn't the most helpful question. Maybe the better question isn't just how much, but why am I giving, and how can my giving be a consistent, joyful expression of love?